Buonasera, buonasera everyone. We are happy you could join us today for the special gathering honoring one of the giants of Western literature, Dante Alighieri, author of the Divine Comedy, or La Divina Commedia, as we say in Italiano. My name is Francesca Mignosa, and a lot of you know me by now. And on behalf of Joyce Mariani, Executive Director of the Italian Cultural Garden, Professor Paolo Basile, Associate Professor of Italian and French Studies at Lake Erie College, and Sandro Bonaiuto, esteemed artist of the new bronze statue of Dante Alighieri, actually, to be dedicated next spring at the Italian Cultural Garden. I'm honored and pleased to welcome you today to this one-of-a-kind literary evening honoring one of Italy's greatest poets and writers, Dante Alighieri, and his Divina Commedia. He had quite an interesting life, so we have some reading to do. Okay, Dante Alighieri was an Italian poet, prose writer, literary theorist, moral philosopher, and political thinker, and one of the great figures of world literature, who was admired for the depth of his spiritual vision and for the range of his intellectual accomplishment. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. He was born in Florence between late May and early June 1265 into a family of the lower nobility. His mother died in his childhood, his father when he was only 18 years old. The most significant event of his youth, according to his own account, was his meeting in 1274 with Beatrice. Didn't you know? A woman. The woman whom he loved and whom he exalted as the symbol of divine grace, first in La Vita Nuova, the New Life, and later in his greatest work, La Divina Commedia, or the Divine Comedy. Scholars have identified Beatrice with the Florentine noblewoman Beatrice Portinari, who died in 1290, aged barely 20. Dante caught sight of her on 3 occasions, but never spoke to her. That's really interesting, never spoke to her. Little is known about Dante's education, although his works reveal an erudition that encompassed nearly all the learning of his age. Dante is known to have been in Bologna in about 1285, where he may have pursued his university studies. During the political struggles that occurred in Italy at this time, he initially supported the faction known as the Guelphs against the party known as the Ghibellines, and also participated in some of the political fights of the time. It was also during this time frame that he married Gemma Donati, a member of a prominent Guelph family from Florence. Dante's first important literary work, La Vita Nuova, was written not long after the death of Beatrice. It is composed of sonnets and canzoni woven together with a prose commentary. The work narrates the course of Dante's love for Beatrice, his premonition of her death in a dream, her actual death, and his ultimate resolve to write a work that would be a worthy monument to her memory. The language used by Dante was contemporary Florentine vernacular. From 1295 to 1306, he was heavily involved in the turbulent political life of Florence. From 1307 to 1309, he was exiled in Verona and other northern Italian cities. He also spent some time in Paris. During the early years of his exile, Dante wrote 2 important works in Latin. De Vulgari Eloquentia, concerning the common speech, is a treatise on the uses and advantages of the Italian language, defending the vernacular as a literary medium. The unfinished Il Convivio, or the Banquet, was intended to be a digest or an encyclopedia in 15 books of all the knowledge of the time. The first book was to be introductory, and the remaining 14 were to take the form of commentary on 14 poems by Dante. Only the first 4 books, however, were completed. Dante's epic masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, was probably begun around 1307. It was completed shortly before his death. The work is an allegorical narrative in verse of great precision and dramatic force, of the poet's imaginary journey through hell, l'inferno, purgatory, il purgatorio, and paradise, il paradiso. In each of these 3 realms, the poet meets with mythological, historical, and contemporary personages. Each character is symbolic of a particular fault or virtue, either religious or political, and the punishment or rewards granted to the characters further illustrate the larger meaning of their action in a universal scheme. Dante is guided through hell and purgatory by Virgil, who is, to Dante, the symbol of reason. Virgilio, for those of us who are. Beatrice, whom he regards as both a manifestation and an instrument of the divine will, is his guide through paradise. Dante intended the poem for his contemporaries and thus wrote it in Italian rather than Latin. He named the poem La Commedia, or the Comedy, because it ends happily in heaven. His journey climaxes by a vision of God and by a complete blending of his own will with that of a divine entity. The work, which provides a summary of the political, scientific, and philosophical thought of the time, may be interpreted on 4 levels: the literary, the allegorical, the moral, and the mystical. Dante's imaginary voyage can be understood as an allegory of the purification of one's soul and of the achievement of inner peace through the guidance of reason and love. In 1316, the city of Florence invited Dante to return from his exile, but the terms offered were generally those given to pardoned criminals. So Dante rejected the invitation, maintaining that he would never return to Florence unless he was granted full dignity and honor. A true Italian, no? He continued to live in exile, spending his last years in Ravenna, where he died either on September 13 or 14th, as the council was saying, 1321, and was buried. His remains have been kept there despite appeals over the centuries from the Florentines, who have still maintained a cenotaph for him in the church of Santa Croce in Florence. Modern poets throughout the world have been inspired by Dante and imbued with Dantean imagery, especially Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Gabriele D'Annunzio, Paul Claudel, and Anna Akhmatova.